My sister's lies convinced my dying father to give her the entire family inheritance. She played the victim perfectly, but I discovered her secret. She was over $100,000 in debt and desperately needed cash. They thought they had outsmarted me, but they had no idea I was about to expose her entire scheme. Our family was never perfect, but I thought we were solid. It was me, my older sister Clara, and our father. Our mother passed years ago, and since then, I had been the one to stay close to home, managing the household and, for the last 2 years, becoming the full-time caregiver for my father. His health had been declining rapidly, and it was a difficult, draining job, but I did it without complaint. He was my dad. You show up for family. Clara lived 5 states away. She was the golden child, the charismatic one with a supposedly glamorous life she'd post about on social media. She'd call Dad once a week for a carefully timed 10-minute chat and visit twice a year, usually around holidays, showering him with cheap gifts and dramatic declarations of love. I was the one changing his bandages, managing his medications, and holding his hand through long, painful nights. But Clara was the one who got the credit. I used to resent it, but I swallowed my pride for Dad's sake. I had no idea that her charisma was a weapon, and she was pointing it directly at my back. The change started subtly. It began after Clara's summer visit. A week after she left, Dad started asking me strange questions. "Alex," he'd say, his voice thin and reedy, "are you doing okay with your money? Clara mentioned you seemed stressed about finances." I was confused. "I'm fine, Dad. A little tired, but my finances are stable. Why?" He'd just shake his head, just making sure. "You know you can always talk to me." But I couldn't. A wall was being built between us, brick by invisible brick. My Aunt Helen, my father's sister, became a frequent visitor. She and Clara were thick as thieves. Helen would sit with Dad for hours, speaking in hushed tones. Whenever I entered the room, they'd fall silent. The air would crackle with unspoken accusations. Then the whispers I wasn't meant to hear began. "He seems so impatient," Helen would murmur to a neighbor on the porch, loud enough for me to overhear from the kitchen. "It's a terrible thing to say, but it's like he's just waiting for the inevitable." The poison was spreading. They were painting me as a vulture, circling my own father. They twisted my exhaustion into greed, my quiet efficiency into cold-heartedness. I tried to defend myself, to show Dad my bank statements, to remind him of all the years I'd been there. But he would just look at me with this profound sadness in his eyes, as if my very presence was a disappointment. He was a sick man, and they were expertly exploiting his vulnerability, feeding him a narrative that made them the heroes and me the villain. I was losing my own father while he was still alive. The loneliness was suffocating. That's when I knew I couldn't fight this in the open. I was fighting ghosts, whispers in the dark. I had to see them in the light. I pressed play, expecting to hear whispers and lies. But what I heard froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't just a simple deception to get the house. It was a full-blown conspiracy, and the recording revealed it involved someone I never, ever would have suspected. But the most chilling part wasn't the web of lies they spun for my father. It was what the recording captured them planning to do after they got the house. It was a secret that turned their simple greed into something far more sinister. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting to stop an absolute catastrophe. I let the recorder run for a week. The waiting was hell. I continued my duties, acting as if nothing was wrong, wearing a mask of calm while my insides churned with dread. Clara called every day now, her voice dripping with fake concern for Dad, and for me. "How are you holding up, Alex?" she'd ask. "You sound so tired. Make sure you're taking care of yourself." The dramatic irony was so thick I could taste it. She was the architect of my exhaustion, and here she was, pretending to be my biggest supporter. Finally, on a Saturday night when Dad was asleep and the house was quiet, I retrieved the device. I plugged my headphones in, took a deep breath, and pressed play. For hours, it was mostly just the sounds of the television and my father's labored breathing. And then I heard it. It was a recording from the day before. Clara was on speakerphone. "Clara, Daddy, I'm just so worried. I had a nightmare that Alex sold the house the second you were gone. That he was going to throw out all of Mom's things, all of your memories, just for a quick buck. He told me he has plans, big investment plans, Dad. He said that? Clara. Not in so many words, but I can see it in his eyes. He's just not sentimental like we are. To him, this house is just an asset. For me, it's our entire childhood. It's the last piece of you and Mom I have left. I would cherish it forever. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. I had never said anything of the sort. I loved that house, but her performance was masterful. Dad, what do you think I should do, sweetie? I don't want our legacy erased. Clara, I don't want to cause trouble, Daddy, but maybe it would be safer if you put the house in my name, just for safekeeping. I'll make sure Alex is always taken care of, I swear. I would never see him out on the street. It's the only way to be sure the home stays in the family. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Dad, you're right, you've always been the sensible one. I'll call the lawyer on Monday, it's for the best. I ripped the headphones from my ears. The silence of the room was deafening. There was no anger, no shouting. The hurt was so deep it bypassed rage and settled into something cold and hard and heavy in my chest. In that moment, the son who loved his father and his sister died. And someone else, a strategist, was born. My plan was born in that moment of cold clarity. It was insane, but it was also perfect. I wasn't going to fight them, I wasn't going to expose them, not yet. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. With my own two hands, I was going to help my sister secure the inheritance she so desperately craved. They thought they were leading me into a trap, but in reality, they were walking straight into mine. The question wasn't whether my plan would work, but whether I had the stomach to watch them celebrate their victory, knowing every triumphant smile and celebratory toast was just a prelude to their absolute and devastating ruin. My plan was simple: do nothing. I played the part they had cast for me. I became more withdrawn, more sullen. I let them see me looking defeated. Clara's calls became sickeningly sweet, filled with pity. Aunt Helen would look at me with a smug sorrow. They thought they were watching a man grieve his inheritance before he'd even lost it. In reality, I was gathering my ammunition. I called a friend of mine, a forensic accountant. I need a favor, I said. I need you to do a deep dive on my sister's finances. I have a feeling her glamorous life is a house of cards. 2 weeks later, he called back. Alex, he said, it's worse than you think. Your sister is drowning. She has over $100,000 in credit card debt, a massive personal loan she's defaulted on, and her car's about to be repossessed. She's not living a glamorous life, she's faking it. She needs a massive cash injection and she needs it yesterday. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the calculated, cruel campaign. It wasn't about sentiment, it was about liquidating my father's only asset to save herself. My father passed away peacefully 2 months later. The funeral was a masterclass in hypocrisy. Clara delivered a tearful eulogy about her wonderful, trusting father, while Aunt Helen nodded along, dabbing her eyes. I remained stoic. They took my silence as weakness. Which brings us back to the lawyer's office. After the will was read and Clara had accepted the condolences and congratulations, she turned to me with a saccharine smile. Alex, don't you worry about a thing, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even though Dad knew what was best, I'll make sure you have a roof over your head. We're still family after all. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then I stood up. Thank you, Clara. Your generosity is noted. Before we conclude, however, I have something I was asked to share. You could call it a final message from Dad. Every eye was on me. Clara's smile tightened. I pulled out my phone and a small Bluetooth speaker. Dad was confused in his final months. He was worried about his legacy. I think it's only fair that we all hear what was truly on his mind. I pressed play. The clear audio of Clara's voice filled the room. Her fake sobs, her poisonous lies, her calculated manipulation. And then our father's frail, manipulated agreement. The color drained from Clara's face. Aunt Helen looked like she had seen a ghost. The rest of my family, my cousins, my uncles, stared at her, their expressions shifting from sympathy to shock and then to disgust. When the recording finished, I didn't say a word. I just let the silence condemn her. Then, I placed a single folder on the table. And this, I said calmly, is a full financial workup on my sister. You'll find she's over $100,000 in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. Her plan was never to cherish this house. Her plan was to sell it the moment the ink was dry on the death certificate. The dam broke. My uncle, a stern but fair man, stood up and looked at his niece with pure contempt. "You poisoned my brother's mind. For money." Clara didn't even try to deny it. She just crumpled, exposed, and humiliated. Aunt Helen tried to rush to her side, but my cousin blocked her path, shaking her head in disgust. They were utterly and completely alone, undone by their own greed and my patient, cold revenge. So, before we get to the update, it's time for the final verdict. Based on everything you've heard so far, who was in the wrong here? Cast your vote in the comments. Now, let's see what happened next. The final update. The aftermath in the lawyer's office was only the beginning. The recording was undeniable proof of undue influence. My lawyer immediately filed a petition to contest the will. Clara and Helen, now family pariahs, had no ground to stand on. Their lawyers advised them to settle immediately rather than face a public court battle where the recording would become public record. The manipulated will was thrown out, and my father's original will, which split everything 50-50 between me and Clara, was honored. But I wasn't done. The house was appraised, and Clara's half was worth a significant amount. But she didn't have the luxury of time. Her creditors were closing in. She needed cash, and fast. I made her an offer. I would buy out her half of the house, but for 40% less than the appraised market value. It was a lowball offer, but it was all cash, and it was immediate. She fought it. She screamed, she threatened, but in the end, her desperation won. She took the deal. The money she got was just enough to pay off her most urgent debts, leaving her with almost nothing. She sold the family legacy she claimed to cherish for pennies on the dollar, just as I knew she would. Today, I live in my childhood home. It's quiet now. The toxic whispers are gone. I am no contact with both Clara and Aunt Helen. From what I hear, the rest of the family has iced them out as well. They got the money they were so desperate for, but they lost everything else. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness for how it all ended. I had to betray my father's trust by recording him to expose a deeper betrayal. It was a messy, painful solution. But every morning, when I drink my coffee in the kitchen my mother designed, I know I did the right thing. I didn't just save a house. I honored the truth of who my parents were, and I protected their memory from the people who tried to twist it for their own selfish gain. The peace I have now was worth the war I had to fight.